What is up, guys? It's Mike of the Nord TV here, and welcome to a video where I will practically be assessing the career of Brock Lesnar in MMA. For those who don't know already, Brock Lesnar nowadays is primarily known as a professional wrestler for the WWE, but prior to his WWE career, even he was a successful amateur wrestler. Um, Famously, he was a NCAA Division One champion in 2000. He wrestled for the WWE for a couple years, and then he transitioned to MMA, where he became the UFC Heavyweight Champion of the world. In this video, I wanted to break down his career and try to assess without any bias how good he actually was. Some people feel like he could have been the best heavyweight ever had he started sooner. Other people feel like he is overrated and didn't really beat anybody good, and he had an advantage in most of his fights. So I wanted to be as unbiased as possible and assess his career from the very beginning. In 2007, Brock Lesnar made his highly anticipated MMA debut. His first opponent was Kim Min-soo. Min-soo didn't really have any good wins as an MMA fighter. He was a better kickboxer. He has a win over Murad Bouazidi. He won that fight by decision, but that's really the only notable win of his professional fighting career. Lesnar wouldn't have any difficulties with him. He would take him down quite quickly and finish him with ground and pound. It wasn't much of a fight, but it did mark Lesnar's first fight, and officially Brock Lesnar was a undefeated MMA fighter. Now, within the next year, Lesnar was already offered a contract to fight for the most prestigious MMA organization in the world, which was the UFC. Now, this was in 2008, and his first opponent was actually Frank Mir. Now, you would think that, they would probably give someone more of a tune-up, someone a little bit lighter, but Brock Lesnar actually was thrown in with Frank Mir in his first professional fight in the UFC, which I honestly think is crazy. And for those who don't know, Frank Mir is a legendary heavyweight. For the UFC, he fought most of his career in the UFC. By the time Lesnar fought him for the first time, Frank Mir had taken a couple rough losses, but he was generally regarded as still very skilled and very dangerous on the ground. So it was definitely a very compelling fight at the time. On February 2nd, 2008, both men come out and meet each other in the middle of the ring. Brock Lesnar took Frank Mir down in less than 10 seconds. And Mir did look to be in trouble. In the middle of Lesnar's ground and pound, Mir turned his head backwards and Lesnar grazed him with a shot to the back of the head, which clearly was by accident. And you could see he pulled it a little bit. There wasn't a ton of power behind it. But the referee decided to stand them up anyway, and he actually deducted a point from Lesnar. Lesnar, once again, once they, were reset, Lesnar took him down. And he had Mir in trouble again. Mir was actually able to scramble out, though, from Lesnar's pressure. And Lesnar, in an attempt to pass Mir's guard, Mir caught his leg, dropped him down for a knee bar, and submitted him about a minute and a half into the fight. There was a lot of controversy at the time about the fight. A lot of people thought the referee was very harsh, and I personally thought the referee was harsh in standing Lesnar up and taking a point away from him. Had the referee not done that, and it's very possible Lesnar would have finished Frank Mir right then and there. It would have been a great debut for him, but even though Lesnar lost, there was still a lot of hype behind Lesnar, just based on how he did. Even in just, the short length of the fight, he still took Frank Mir down twice. He had him in trouble. He made a mistake. He got caught. The referee was, his decisions were very disputed and very controversial. But nonetheless, Brock Lesnar unfortunately lost his first UFC fight. Had he beaten Frank Mir, it would have been a great debut win. But moving on to the next, Lesnar would actually come back to the UFC. He was originally offered a one-fight contract, but Dana White offered him another contract to fight even more. And in his next fight, he took on Heath Herring. Now, Heath Herring was a decent fighter in his prime. He has a couple of good wins on his resume, but at the end of the day, he was at the tail end of his career, and he was nowhere near as dangerous as Frank Mir was. So, nonetheless, Brock Lesnar was able to dominate the entirety of the fight, and he was able to win a unanimous 30-26 decision to get his first win in the UFC. And just like that, Lesnar was offered a title shot against none other than Randy Couture in his third UFC fight. Now, Randy Couture really doesn't need any introduction for most MMA fans, but just to give you guys a little bit of an idea of the form he was in going into the Lesnar fight, Randy Couture was 45 years old. He was the oldest UFC heavyweight champion in history. He had fought pretty much his entire career in the UFC up until that point, with the exception of a couple fights. He became the oldest heavyweight champion by defeating Tim Silva in a shutout performance, in one of the best performances in a heavyweight title fight in history. After that, he knocked out Gabriel Gonzaga, which was a pretty good win at the time. In the last 5 years, his only 2 losses were to Chuck Liddell and to Vitor Belfort, the latter of which he avenged. And that loss was very controversial to begin with. It was a doctor stoppage. It wasn't really a emphatic loss. To Chuck Liddell, though, he did lose twice, but he had previously beaten Chuck Liddell when he was younger. Chuck Liddell improved, however, and made adjustments later on. He also has wins over Tito Ortiz, Pedro Rizzo, Kevin Randleman. He is an absolute legend. After the Lesnar fight, he would have a close fight with Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira. He would go on to beat Brandon Vera, Mark Coleman, and he would have the gimmick fight with James Toney, which you really can't give him too much credit for that. But Randy Couture was still a very good fighter by the time Lesnar fought him, and the fight they would have would actually be very competitive. In the first round, Couture would make Lesnar work in the clinch quite a bit. He actually got up from 2 of Lesnar's takedowns, and he nearly took Lesnar down himself. Lesnar did grab onto the cage, and a lot of people felt, including Couture himself, that that's what kept Lesnar up. In the second round, Couture was continuing to make Lesnar work, but Lesnar strengthened his considered. Lesnar did pretty much have every advantage besides experience in this fight. He was younger, fresher, stronger, faster. Couture was just, a lot older, a lot more battle worn, but he was experienced. Nonetheless, considering the form that Couture had been in, quite the few years previously, it was still a pretty big statement at the time to beat Couture, especially in that fashion. Now, with Lesnar being the UFC heavyweight champion now, one of the few fights that made sense for Lesnar at the time was the rematch with Frank Mir. In the rematch, Lesnar would pretty much do what he did to Frank Mir in the first fight, except there was no controversy and Lesnar was able to maintain his top position. He was more patient this time around, showing that he did learn from his mistakes in the first fight, and he honestly dominated Frank Mir then. When we talk about Frank Mir, obviously, as mentioned before, he's an absolute legend in the game, but he was a guy that took some rough losses here and there. But he also beat Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira twice. He has a win over Tank Abbott. He knocked out Marco Crocrop. He beat Roy Nelson. This is a guy who was genuinely a high level, and he was dangerous for most opponents. He was, a former champion, and I genuinely think that Frank Mir was a very, very good win for Lesnar, especially at the time when he was still young, like Lesnar was. And I think this really put Lesnar on the map as a legitimate UFC heavyweight. I think, people were not overlooking Lesnar at this point. Now, up next in Lesnar's career, he would face Shane Carwin. And at the time, this was actually a very compelling fight. Shane Carwin was 12-0 with 100% finish ratio. He was on a pretty good streak, beating Gabriel Gonzaga and Frank Mir in the first round with knockouts. He had previously finished all his opponents. So this was a very interesting fight at the time, and it was seen as by many as a good test for Lesnar. At UFC 116, the fight would materialize, and Brock Lesnar in the first round would get hurt quite badly by Shane Carwin. He would be on the floor, and Shane Carwin would hit him with a lot of ground and pound, and at some point it looked like the fight was going to be stopped, but nonetheless the referee let it carry on. And in the second round, with Lesnar being able to weather the Lesnar, surprisingly, with Lesnar defending the title twice, at the time that was actually the record for most UFC heavyweight title defenses. So Lesnar also broke that record when he beat Shane Carwin. I think in retrospect, Shane Carwin wasn't the best win. In most probability, most elite heavyweights would have probably beaten Shane Carwin. His only good win was against Frank Mir, but Frank Mir had also been knocked out by the likes of Brandon Vera and Brandon Vera turned out to be, pretty beatable by most elite heavyweights as well. So I don't think this win was as great as some people might think it is, but it was a decent defense at the time, and this would actually be the last official win of Brock Lesnar's UFC career. Now, it is quite known that around this time, Lesnar had been dealing with some health issues. He was having a couple problems with his digestion, with infections, and just diseases of his digestive tract. And these issues were actually affecting him prior to the Carwin fight, even. Going into the Cain Velasquez fight, who was his next opponent. Lesnar, was having some health issues, but nonetheless, the fight would materialize and happen. At the start of the fight, Lesnar would come out very aggressively, and he would score a takedown on Cain Velasquez early on. But Cain Velasquez, using his wrestling accolades, was able to get back up, and Lesnar was working very hard to get him back down again. He did take him down briefly again, but Cain Velasquez popped right up, and they would circle out. Cain Velasquez would take control of the now tired Lesnar. He would take him down himself, continuously land with good accuracy with striking, and he would hurt Lesnar on the feet, and Velasquez would finish him. And just like that, Brock Lesnar has been knocked out in a single round, and Cain Velasquez was now the new UFC Heavyweight Champion, ending Lesnar's reign. Now, Lesnar would take some time off to continue battling some of his ongoing health issues. He would return and face Alistair Overeem, and this was a very one-sided fight. Lesnar was able to, or was not able to, amount any substantial offense. He went for a takedown, which was completely stuffed by Overeem, and Overeem would finish him inside a single round in brutal fashion. Now, had Lesnar beaten either Cain Velasquez or Alistair Overeem, these would have been wins that really propelled him to the next level. But unfortunately, these fights, with the circumstances surrounding them, were quite one-sided. And it is safe to say, I think, that Lesnar never truly reached the elite level. He did pick up some good wins, Randy Couture, Frank Mir, Shane Carwin. At the time, especially the Couture and Mir wins, those are all pretty solid wins. And I do think Lesnar was a good heavyweight. He was, in his prime, he would have been a formidable opponent for most, assuming that he was perfectly healthy. But there's just that doubt that Lesnar could compete with true elite heavyweights who are fresh and young and similar size like he is. Just a note, Lesnar would actually return 4 years later to the UFC, and he would actually fight Mark Hunt, and he would win. And at the time, that was actually a good win, but it was overturned due to Lesnar testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. So you cannot count that. So let me know what you guys think. I personally think that Lesnar was a good heavyweight. I think he was, with his size and his wrestling ability, he was a force for pretty much anyone at the time. And I think he did the right thing by going back to the WWE and just playing it safe and making a ton of money there. Let me know what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoy the video. As always, I'll see you guys later, and have a good one.